Re- Recording in progress.
Got it. And yes, as you mentioned, the captions up on the screen, those are actually only going to work for me and not for anyone else who contributes, simply because it's using my microphone and I have these earbuds in, so it's not hearing y'all. So
Gotcha.
that's one of the glitches here with the use of the earbuds. But yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this topic of about supporting neurodivergent folks in your industry. Um, and there's a couple of reasons why. I am. First of all, I like to always start with the fact that I am not identified as a neurodivergent person myself. That would mean sort of that I identify in one or more of these ways. Some people would call me allistic, which is like a non-autistic person, neurotypical. There's different sorts of language or verbiage that might be used for people who aren't neurodivergent. And so I am not. But my experiences professionally and personally with neurodivergent folks is really what has led me to spend the past 15 years working in this space. And so I've worked in this space as a therapist for mostly autistic people from the ages of 15 months old to 81 years old, really across the lifespan, providing different kinds of supportive therapies from individual to family to group and couples work. And then after I started as a therapist in my career, and then later on, I got trained in research and got my doctoral degree, and that's when I became an educator and supervisor. And what that means is that I am able to train future therapists in that role. So I hopefully help those future therapists be as ready to work with neurodivergent clients and clients of all sorts, of course, but given that that's been my specialty area, I want people to know when they become therapists that these are the kinds of clients that you can have, and what are the best practices for working to support neurodivergent people in their mental health journey specifically. But yeah, I'm interested that now that you know a little bit about me, I'd like to know a little bit more about you two here, and I guess these are questions that you can answer as openly as you want, but obviously whatever you're comfortable with. But the two that I usually like to know from people that I'm talking with about this is what are your personal connections or knowledge of this topic, and maybe what professional experiences you might have. So either one of those that you're willing to share on. Bren, do you
Go
want to
ahead,
go
Brent.
first?
Yeah, go ahead,
You're
Brent. You can go
unmuted.
Oh,
first.
Yeah.
I forgot to mute myself.
Yeah.
Sure. So I have ADHD, um, and I've had it. I got diagnosed when I was in my 40s. I've had it my entire life. I guess ADD would be more like I'm not the hyperactive.
Yeah.
I struggled a lot, especially when I get overwhelmed. And recently had a staff person not diagnosed with ADHD, but I have a lot of experience with it
Yeah.
personally, and
Suspected. Yeah.
I have a degree in psychology, and so I have experience with people with it, and so I suspected that he might have it. And so we had some coaching sessions, and the last coaching session didn't go well. He quit. So I know that a lot of people do have that. So I wanted, part of it was how can I work with them better? And I mean, I thought I was doing a good job with the coaching, and I don't know if I was or not because, he isn't with us anymore.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing both the personal piece and that professional piece, which is also uh, vulnerable because you're sharing about a challenge that happened, right, with this one particular person. And yeah, hopefully today we can talk about some of the strategies that would help, with future neurodivergent hires. Thanks. Sean, do you want to share?
I I can say that I've not been diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure that I am. Simply because like when I was a kid, and this my mother tells us that there was a time where they and of course I'm older than most. But when I was a kid, I was the doctor recommended that I be put on Ritalin, which was the drug of choice at the time. And now I don't know what the diagnosis was. My mother made the choice not to. Because I think she knew enough other people whose kids were on it to think, yeah, I don't want that for. And I'm happy that she didn't. However, I would have liked to maybe maybe we need to revisit that conversation again as I got older. But I know I've worked with people who were both diagnosed and undiagnosed. I have friends and family, both diagnosed and undiagnosed, and there are definitely challenges, especially if some more severe cases that I've encountered. And I know for me, I work mostly alone in an office, but the flip side of that is I also work with over 400 member companies that are all over the state, and so that's I have a lot of exposure to a lot of the variety of stuff out there, and I'm always looking for ways that I can better communicate, better work with, and understand what's going on around me. So
thank you. It's really interesting that you both share about different, personal experiences. It's more and more common for people like Bren, what you have shared, to be diagnosed in adulthood, and even not even in younger adulthood, in mid to even late adulthood, and sort of have this eye-opening experience of, wow, this really helps explain so much of my life.
Yeah.
And so that is something that, especially with more awareness and appreciation of these diagnoses or these identities, and those are sort of interesting parts of this space, because in the community there's a lot of conversation about that being diagnosed, sort of officially, formally, whatever that looks like. Sean, you mentioned like you don't even know. Obviously, you were young when you heard about the doctor's recommendation. But there's a diagnostic part here that's sort of more formal and medical in nature. And then there's an identity piece here that I think a lot of people may not even go the diagnostic route or the formal route, but benefit from learning about their attributes or traits that might line up with some of these diagnoses, and then what strategies are helpful to implement. Because a lot of the strategies that are helpful to implement for neurodivergent folks are just helpful strategies for like everyone. So that's a helpful context for me to understand for both of you. And then I think just generally for people watching and listening, you know, this is an emerging topic, I think, in our worlds, generally right now, just in social spaces, definitely on the internet. So many conversations happening around this topic, and different opinions about these things. So it's kind of a controversial space at times, and there's a lot of nuance and idiosyncrasy to it. So that is part of what I wanted to talk about really next, because some people really are unfamiliar with what neurodivergence is. And there's different language around neurodiversity, neurodivergence, neurodistinct, neurotypicality, or neurotype. And so all of that I start with because, this similar to other spaces, socially and diagnostically and in identity, like the queer spaces too, like language is a very big important part of this world. So I like to start with, what is it? And really be able to acknowledge that it is a distinction in one's brain. It is a neurodevelopmental, neurocognitive process that really just has people's life experience being different than what we might quote unquote expect or anticipate from development. So we have like anticipated development and things that we think are like expected in the workplace or in social life or in relationships. And then we have things that may be like distinct and people may not be expecting. And so this is language that is more affirming versus pathological. And I think people are used to sort of the pathological sort of language or disability based language. And it really depends on the person you're working with, what they best identify with. In this talk, am approaching it more from an affirming language perspective and moving a little bit more away from pathology, just to demonstrate that it can be done and to demonstrate something different, because people are used to saying ADHD, autism, learning disability, other mental health conditions. They provide these deficits, these challenges, these struggles, but it's quite limited in its scope to think of these things only from a deficit perspective, right? Because there are incredible strengths and unique attributes that people with these diagnoses bring to the industry that uh, anticipated development people, like the neurotypical people like myself, I do not have those skills. Those are sets that I do not, and other people that may not carry these diagnoses also do not have. And so I really wanted to start there to kind of frame the way that I talk about this and the way that some people talk about this, which may be different than what people are expecting. But distinct development really does usually align with some of the diagnoses that you all mentioned. There is ADD, attention deficit disorder, which is really more like difficulty sometimes attending to things that are not obvious that someone may be picking up on, and difficulty maybe learning things, especially that are not of interest. And what is distinct about ADHD is that there's a hyperactivity component there, which may translate to like body movement and like difficult, like just needing a lot more input sometimes activity wise than a non-hyperactive counterpart. So that's something. Obviously, autism is my really the specialty area that I've worked a lot with. And that's what ASD here means, and that is included in this neurodivergent category. So are different learning disabilities, dyslexia, dyscalculia, just to name the two most common learning disabilities. And then other mental health conditions. So sometimes people who maybe have a diagnosis of schizophrenia or bipolar, they may also identify in this neurodivergent kind of category. So those are just ones that not all the time, and I think they're not the ones that are assumed to be in this kind of identity or disability diagnoses, but it can be. So I just wanted to sort of let people know that that could be part of the picture here. And again, I think when we're talking about this and connecting the dots across neurodiversity and these different pieces of development and diagnosis, that we avoid generalizations and really attend to nuance. I think people can say like, well, all autistic people don't make eye contact or they have trouble with eye contact. And that is not necessarily true. Sometimes that's a feature and trait that makes it sort of visibly obvious to people that something may be distinct for a person who doesn't engage in eye contact in the same way that maybe other people do. But that's something that I will not be sort of generally saying in this kind of a talk, that all people in this category do this one kind of thing. So taking the individual for what they really show up as and how they present and what their unique strengths are and what their unique challenges are is really vital to working in this space, and avoiding those kinds of things is sort of the other sort of flip side to that. Do you all have any questions about these diagnoses or anything that I've just mentioned?
No, I mean that's I think that gives us a good framework for the conversation.
Okay, cool. Anyway, also jump in at any point in time that you have a conversation or a so this is so some of the information that I'm pulling from is coming from resources that I have here at the end. They're all links to books or websites that I think are really helpful. But one of the primary resources that I use is this book called The Power of Potential. And it's about, a diverse, neurodiverse workspace. But I don't know if you've heard of this organization here. They're in South Florida, not in other parts of the state yet, but they're a car wash company called Rising Tide. They made national news at different points, but the owners of this car wash franchise basically wrote this book, The Power of Potential, and they've created like a 90% workforce of autistic people in the car wash industry space, which is obviously not the brewing space. But it's also like a technical industry that requires like a certain level of production as far as what their sort of specific goals are. And it's really it's an interesting model. And they also in this book, The Power of Potential, refer to other industries from the medical to you name it. They include examples of other industries, tech, etc. And a lot of these recommendations come from that. The Dieri family, they're one of the best. I know them personally, and they're one of the best, I think, leaders in the field of neurodivergent hiring and sustaining employment practices. So one of the places that is recommended to really start at is to identify the unique challenges that your workplace, maybe differently or more than others, requires of employees to manage through their talent and skill of employees. So it asks hiring managers, owners, supervisors to sort of start there by finding out like what are the things that you're looking for in your employees that sort of maybe innate. And for like the example of Rising Tide, they were looking for the innate qualities of autism. They were looking for people who may really be able to attend to detail in a way that was important, and that can be a strength of many autistic people. So that's just like one example of an innate quality. And then what are the skills of the job, the things that may need to be learned by people that may not be an innate quality. And obviously these are going to potentially, well, not potentially, they are certainly going to be different dependent on the position in the brewing industry that you're hiring for. Obviously the innate qualities or the talents and the skills or the learned abilities are going to be very different for front of house, right? For someone in the tap room than they will be for someone in the brew house. So how are you, kind of intentionally coming up with what these look like based on the different, even jobs or positions you're hiring for? And one of the things that is recommended in that process of looking at the unique challenges of your workspace and what the talent and the skills are that you're looking for in your employees is really looking at who you've worked with so far. Can you kind of try to take an objective look at the employees who you've had who have thrived in your workspace and those who have struggled? And I think that can help drill that down a little bit, because sometimes a question like that is kind of abstract and very big. And so the recommendation for how you might start answering those questions is really to look at what you have experienced from your employees who have thrived and who have struggled. So that's the first part. The second step is really like what it kind of asks you to zoom out even more than that, which is to sort of think about the values of your workplace and the culture that you create in the workplace. because some of the later strategies will connect back to those values. So are your values around, inclusion, or I think probably for everybody that there's a little bit of that. But in some of the places, the values may be more about exclusivity, and not in the effort to like discriminate against people or not include people intentionally, but more to say we do have specific things that certain positions require that have exclusive characteristics. So for example, like in my space, which I work mostly at a university, people can't teach without specific credentials. Like you can't get accredited, you can't be supported at very important levels without some exclusive pieces. So the workplace culture and value may be inclusion in some places. How can we be inclusive from an educational attainment perspective, but maybe exclusive in other areas, right? We need to really think about who we're going to hire because of these particular requirements that we might have. So getting specific about these skills and attributes, that's really sort of the first challenge that is suggested. And this is probably, this isn't anything new. This is a pretty, I think, a standard business practice. But when thinking about the talent piece and the innate qualities that you may really try to cultivate among a neurodivergent, staff person, or even breweries that are specifically focused on neurodiversity. In my brief research on this, there's 2 in Colorado that are neurodiversity focused breweries. One is called like Brew Labs. I can't, the other one I can't, Brewability and Perkiomen in Colorado. I guess those are both ones that I found in my, again, more brief search. There may be, and there probably are others. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Some of the things that they talked about in some of the literature that I found on them is a lot of front-facing neurodiversity, sort of affirming things like having sensory spaces, having like a light bright wall fixture, like a visual component. So in less about like the employment piece and maybe more about like, hey, we are this, and kind of for consumers to come and enjoy themselves in their tasting rooms. But I think that when that is part of one's product, that it's also likely reflective of their practices. And in these cases, they very much like Rising Tide, which was created to also employ autistic people, because autistic people are people with disabilities are some of the most and underemployed people out there. So part of the initiative is to start saying, hey, let's build businesses where we can also support employment for these people. And that comes back to like the value piece of the workplace, right? Did you have a question or comment too, Bren?
No, I thought that was really interesting. I was going to ask if it was basically for the employees or if it was, and you answered the question. So, and then I forgot to mute myself.
Oh, it's okay.
But I have noticed in my experience, because our brewery is almost 7 years old, and having met a lot of brewers, they are comfortable with each other. But when you meet people who are, because I'm not the brewer, my husband is, it seems like they are comfortable in their talking about brewing and this is just a generalization, and I know we're not supposed to do generalizations, but it seems like
it's not. It's your experience. It's your personal. It's your lived experience. Yeah.
It seems a little hard to like break into, getting to know them, because I'm not saying they're on the spectrum. My husband will say sometimes he feels he might be on, because he's just not comfortable talking to people unless it's something they really know about. So is that something that is common with people? I'm like, again, I'm not saying my husband's autistic, but with neurodivergent people, is it not comfortable talking about things they don't know about, and or the what is it with socialization, I guess, is one of the questions I have. And if you are going to address it later, that's fine too.
No, that's a great question. That yeah, I'm not. I think I address it sort of as we talk about the affirming practices, but I think something to think about is how how people's neurodivergence or autism then play into the roles that they choose in their employment. So if you're going to be going into the brewing industry, brewing itself highly technical, and people who have neurodiversity as part of their picture can get very specialized, because even for ADHD and ADD folks, if you're interested in something, you will people can go down rabbit holes and spend inordinate amounts of time on things. It's not that you can't focus, right? It's that when you are focusing, it's more like the balanced focus is harder, right? But areas of focus that you're really into, you can really excel at. So especially for like, some people going into something like brewing could be really attractive for its focus on technicalities, right? And some of the specifics that are required there. And in some brewing spaces, it can be pretty solo, right? Some of the work that you're doing, a lot of like, I know when I go into my husband's brewery, almost all the people in the brew house are like earbuds in, doing the
Yep.
task that they're doing, right? Like, because this is what they have to do. And so there's a piece of that for people who really thrive in solitude, right? Like that's a great space for them. They don't have to necessarily be the front-facing taproom people who are dealing with, some of the more challenging social relationship stuff with clients and customers, right? So
Clients
yeah,
and
I
customers aren't
do
ever challenging, are they, Bren?
never, never. So yeah, so I think that there's some naturally appealing parts of the job, Bren, that people who are neurodiverse would gravitate to. So yeah, I don't know that there's any research on like the brewing industry and neurodivergence as far as like prevalence and such, but just having, been in as a spouse in, meeting a lot of different people with the different breweries that my husband has worked with. Yeah, there's a lot of people that we've had conversations about, like you said, like suspected, because of the way that they really thrive in those ways, with the technical aspects, with the solitude, with yeah, maybe sometimes it being hard to talk about anything else because you're so invested in that your profession is also your passion. Um, that certainly I have definitely seen that
Do you,
myself in my own lived experience.
do you think that there's an overlap also because we talk about brewing as a very technical profession, but there's also an element of it being a very creative profession?
Creative. Mm-hmm.
And I know that there are, again, not to generalize, but there are a lot of creative people that would identify themselves as neurodivergent or neuroatypical, whether it's and like a hyperfixation on a project, whether it's a piece of art, whether it's a piece of music, and I know that I've seen that sort of crossover or confluence of hyper technicality and hyper creativity in some of the people in the industry, and they make some of the best product, and then you put them in a social situation and they don't know how to function. And so I think that there's, because I think we talk a lot about the technical side of it, but I think the creative side is also is something that is definitely represented in our world as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Absolutely. Go ahead, Bren.
Oh, I was just going to say, and one of the things that I want to learn is how to relate to them, because I want to just new board member. I'm going to meet a lot of the brewers, and I want to, but I also want to be able to support the local people. But just like how can I talk to them that it's something that not going to be like, and I'm not one of those people that are like, hey, how are you doing? But I really want to get to know them, but I don't know how to do that because they seem so uncomfortable when I talk to them.
Yeah. Well, we can jump to that because I think this next slide is really about like the affirming workplace practices that are more sort of about like how you might change up like from the beginning of hiring someone. But we can jump to what you're talking about, 'cause that seems interesting. But just so you know, this is a slide, and Sean, I can send this to you for people who want the, the
Yes, but
visual
yeah,
aid.
I typically what I do is after we're done and I have the recording, I will also then attach, if there's a slide deck, I'll also attach that as well. So.
Perfect. But so yeah, so this is related to that, and I can maybe come back to that or refer to it later. But yeah, I think some of the things that, as far as just approach is concerned, Bren, the first thing is really, I think, what can happen is people feel that are interacting with someone who's maybe uncomfortable or awkward or neurodiverse, even if you do or don't know that, is that they're not sure about how to like connect, right? And how to like, and oftentimes that's because for the more socially savvy person, quote unquote, it feels like you have to, like you feel the responsibility to carry the conversation or be sort of the facilitator of that. But I would really, I think some of this falls under sort of collaboration a little bit, like being able to come to those conversations and simply start by sort of being curious about the person, really sort of asking questions about them, and, wondering. And sometimes those questions can actually not be just content questions, like, hey, what brewery do you work for? Or, what do you do on the weekends? Or I don't know, those are like, interest-based questions, which I think aren't bad to start with. I think sometimes that can open up the question or the conversation a lot. But it's also like, what would make you most comfortable in this environment, especially for people who you may be, like if you're bringing some of your employees to the conference or something like that, right? Like, what would make you most comfortable in this situation? It's okay to show up to the welcome party or the welcome cocktail hour or whatever, and then leave after 15 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to burn yourself out socially if you don't want to. So those are, and some of this, again, a lot of this is preparatory, you know what I mean, like, and helping people like get ready for something, again, a lot of these practices are around that. How can we on the front end prepare ourselves and others to be successful in these different work scenarios? And you can have those conversations with anybody, I think, you know what I mean? Neurotypical people may have certain limits on some of these things and how much they want to engage socially. So I think, Bren, even asking someone, hey, are you enjoying this? Or, is, anything that you want to talk about, those kinds of things. And some people may say, no, I'm good, and that's okay. I think it's just like sort of giving people the space to navigate these situations the way that they want to navigate them, is giving them permission to do that, I think, and letting them know you're an okay person to be open with. Like, I think sometimes even if you're noticing a kind of a person who seems uncomfortable, going up and making sort of just like a like side by side comment, like, oh, these things are, it's so noisy in here, or these things are a lot, or you know what I mean, like kind of just acknowledging the breadth of the experience can be sort of, uh, I don't know, a pathway in. Does that make sense? But yeah, and I think that, doing that with, and based on your personal experiences, both of you, it sounds like doing that just with humility and curiosity. And I think people that are socially awkward are used to being checked in on, like, are you okay? Which is like, not, you don't need that necessarily, but just sort of the acknowledgement. And again, beforehand, just kind of giving permission, especially if you know somebody and you have a good sense of them, to say like, yeah, you ready to go? Like, or have you had enough of this? Those kinds of things can be helpful. And just acknowledging the overwhelm. The other thing that I think can be helpful in these situations is to give people clear expectations. What is the expectation of a workplace scenario, whether it's the conference or otherwise? And now, of course, the conference is just on my mind because that's what the example was. But like, okay, if we're gonna all go to the conference together, these are the specific things, I need from you at this. I want you to go to these 3 sessions, 1 session on this, 1 session on that, or one of your choice, whatever that is. Like, the more specific and concrete you can be with your employment expectations, the better. Bren, you mentioned, you already have, coaching as part of your employment, practice, right? Like if somebody is having some sort of an issue or a challenge, you're going to provide them with coaching. And that's one of the most important parts of the coaching process, is like, how can we be objective about what the goals are, right? Not just, we need to see improvement, right? Like, okay, we need to see this very specific thing being done, and probably in this kind of a time frame or with this sort of expectation. So I think, and you may already have this, but one of the recommendations talks almost about having like really kind of clear like scoring or rating systems that people with clearly the defined scoring processes. So what does a 1 look like? And this book, The Power of Potential, I'm not selling this book, by the way. I have no financial interest in this book, but it gives some examples about like, what does like a scoring look like for like somebody who's dealing with, for example, like difficulty getting feedback. You know what I mean? Like, what does a 1 look like with difficulty getting feedback? 1 might look like being really defensive, not being able to identify your role in some sort of a problem or issue that has arisen. That might be a 1 and a really highly concerned, or maybe even worse than that. It may be like screaming and yelling and, doing things that are not effective or productive in the workplace. And a 5 might look like this. You know what I mean? It might look like, okay, like being able to say, well, take responsibility for what happened. I really messed up. And, asking questions like, how can I improve? What can I do to prevent this sort of a thing in the future? So I hope that kind of helps. But the structure and the like recommendations around how you can communicate clearly and using guides to help you be objective about that is really a neurodiversity affirming practice that can help. I think it takes some work on the front end from like a supervisor owner perspective to do those things. Certainly, it's not that there's no effort put into that, but the gains, I think, like even for current and future folks, can be, I think, pretty valuable.
Thanks.
Of course, yeah. And that actually plays into what is connected to some of these like first steps in the employment process, which for people who are neurodivergent, there's something to know is that interviews may, and this is the social piece too that we're talking about, interviews may look horrible. Answering questions may not go well. Like a traditional interview type of process is really actually suggested to be totally thrown out. Don't do them. Don't do whatever typical interview process you have learned about or have done in the past. Really change up the interview process. And in this recommendation, is really shifting the interview from what you might think of traditional and making it more performance based, making it an audition of sorts, quote unquote. So that would potentially involve, okay, this person, we've met them, we've talked to them briefly, we know a little bit about them. Let's have them do some sort of, apprentice day or something like that. What do they look like when they have a couple of hours doing this particular role? And that process would obviously have to be very specifically designed by you or by the people that are involved in this, and give clear criteria for what makes somebody having passed that audition and what is not a passing, criteria for those auditions. What might failure look like? So, let's say you were to say, all right, this person may be a good seller person, right? They may be good at some of the requirements of that particular job position. What would an audition look like for that person? May they, alongside the employee who's already doing some of those tasks, like washing kegs, etc., listen, could an audition involve that process, right? Could an audition involve this or that? And an audition may be just like accompanying the brewer to the brew house, and an audition may be more social, relational, right? Like how that are here, because you really cannot tell that at an interview. That's what the research says. Like whatever happens in an interview, like 80% of it does not end up like translating to the job performances and tasks. It's really interesting, the review of the literature they have on this in that particular book. So that's something to consider. It's definitely different. It's not as easy, I think. It takes planning and it takes resources. But one of the recommendations for sure. And something to know about from an employer perspective is that there are grants available for these types of things that actually you wouldn't have to, as a small business owner, pay those people for, like, let's say you did like an audition that was like the one I mentioned, that you don't necessarily want to be exploiting people for free labor. That would be problematic, of course. So, how do we actually compensate people for that audition time? And Career Source, which is a agency in Florida that has they have specific grants to help employers pay for training employees. So that's just a resource I wanted to share about. The other piece here is like structured supervisor selection, like who's going to be running some of this, and what are the qualities and values of supervisors, because those people are going to be the people who are helping with the audition process, helping provide affirming spaces for the neurodivergent folks that are working in your spaces. And again, kind of creating those objective rating systems for employees, for supervisors. Those are things where you can have independent people look at these processes as far as like, hey, this person's come in, they've done the audition. Let's get multiple perspectives, if you can, on those independent ratings when possible. So the other thing that's highly recommended is visual systems and guides. So this is a good example of one of the Rising Tide, that car wash visual guide. Like this is one of the tasks that their employees have to do. They have to be able to, change the trash and take out the trash and replace the trash with a new bag. And so this is, what it looks like. This is what it does not look like, and these are the steps for doing such. So including those clear instructions and nonverbal aids. It's not enough oftentimes just to say it once. I don't know if that's the experience that you've had, like, hey, here's this 5 things you have to do. Like, okay, can I even remember 2 of those things? And then what were the other 3? And, the just providing verbal instruction or guide can really be a recipe for failure for neurodivergent people in the workspace. So doing something like this, creating clear checklists, creating visual aids like this requires, again, lots of planning and procedure, but also even just having visual checklists. I know people, you have standard operating procedures, et cetera, that are usually checklist-like. But yeah, Bren.
So I do this mostly because I want to make sure, but how would you couch it for the people that are allistic or not neurodiverse? Because I think sometimes it comes off as overbearing and like not micromanaging, but less like,
yeah,
in that world of overbearing and like.
I get that. Yeah.
Okay.
I do think that that comes back down to, or is connected to, at least in my mind, to the values, Bren. Like, if people are very clearly aware of your values early on in the hiring slash, employment process, they'll know, like, okay, these things are in place because of our effort to be inclusive for, the neurodivergent folks that we have. That's what I think of when that kind of question comes up. And I think the open transparency about that and communication about those values and those practices, I think helps people who might interpret this as what you mentioned, overbearing or micromanaging, as just, oh yeah, no, this is just a helpful tool for some people. And also kind of a helpful tool, again, for almost anyone. I mean, when I put the trash bag on, I don't do it as well as like my husband, for example. He has some method that I don't know about tucking and stuff. Um, but you know, again, I guess I could see how if my husband put this up on the wall above our kitchen trash can, I would be like, huh? You're being pretty controlling, right?
Yeah, I don't think
But
I don't think that goes over so well in the home.
yeah, but I mean, maybe I disagree with you because, but if we were to have a conversation and say, hey, how do we make like our kitchen processes better? And like, maybe this, I don't remember how to do the thing that you do with the trash can that like makes it really helpful. Like, so it's about the conversation. I think,
That's what I was going to say. Is if you talked about it ahead of time, that's fine. If it just showed up there, that would be like,
yeah, which is part of the values. Maybe your values are transparency. Maybe your values are open communication.
Yes.
And so that's why those kind of conversations are key to all of it. Yeah. Otherwise it would just seem like a passive aggressive,
right,
flight.
right.
Yeah. And yeah, that's an important thing to anticipate and know, that if your employees or if your loved ones are sensitive to that and you haven't had a conversation about it, it's not enough to just do this. It has to accompany something else.
And I think our staff, I mean, we talk about it and I needed, I mean, I had to work this week because one of our staff members was sick and I have the closing sheet, everything that you need to do and how to do it and stuff. And we have the opening and I needed it because I couldn't remember because I don't close very often. So, but I just wanted to check in, but I guess that would be for like new people to like talk about how important it is. And the reason why we do it is because, there's a lot of tasks and we can't all remember all the things that we need to do.
Yeah, you can frame it that way. And again, even if you were to change a practice, to talk to existing employees about something, because sometimes those checklists that we devise, they're always modified and, we're always hopefully improving our processes in some way, shapes, and forms. So just having that, I think that that is part of collaboration too, which is what I mentioned earlier. It's not just like the supervisors or the owners or the management coming in and saying, this is what we're doing. If you were to create a visual guide or system in your brewery, you'd want to go around and ask people about it, right? Like, if we're going to do something like this, what would be the most helpful in it? And so they're part of it and they're not just, being told about it or being forced to adhere to something. That's a key ingredient. And especially, like you talk about really something being helpful for you, but when we, started this whole talk discussing about the uniqueness of people, some people you end up designing things for people that will be helpful for an individual. So collaborating with that individual, let's say you hire someone who's minimally speaking or non-speaking. Do you need someone who's speaking to do some of those technical jobs, like even maybe some of the custodial things or the maintenance things? You might not need someone who's going to interact all that much through verbal communication. So are there going to be communication systems that they use that you might have to really tailor to that person? That's where accommodations come in too, just so that, I hit that point here. Creating like, ADA is an important thing that, people need to be able to adhere to when people present with accommodations from that perspective. So they always have to be reasonable and within the scope of work, but sometimes when we're thinking about exploring accommodations in the workplace, we have to think about, all right, what are realistic timelines for some people? Maybe, you know, the timelines that we have can be adjusted. Some timelines cannot be adjusted. That's just not an option. But maybe there are areas and spaces for that. Time off policies, like having policies where, you know, our time off policy is you just tell me that you need the time off. I don't need to have a specific reason why. You know, there are mental health days, there are physical health days, whatever that looks like. What are those policies that could be honoring of some of these things? And then just those accessible environmental pieces, with, you know, again, those examples I talked about, sensory, you know, sensitivity, having people, allowing them to have noise canceling headphones in loud spaces, um, and whatever those other things mean. But I do think that all of this is connected to creating a psychologically safe environment too. Being able to, if someone comes to you and says, this isn't for my neurodivergent self, this isn't working. And whether they say it because they say it connected to the diversity or you suspect it, right? Like you were saying earlier, being able to be non-defensive about that from a leadership perspective, to own mistakes and, you know, be able to adjust and shift things, I think is a really important part of these affirming workplace practices that I know I hadn't really mentioned yet. So I am also respectful of time, Sean, and we are here at 12:01. So
Oh, we are, aren't we? I
we
wasn't even
are.
watching the clock. So
Well, this is convenient. This is the last slide,
yeah.
and these are just the resources and references that I wanted people to be able to have access to if they want. So the first is an autism-friendly business initiative, and that links to one of the Florida Centers for Autism and Related Disabilities, or CARD. That's a free resource center for anybody living in the state of Florida to learn more about autism and other, you know, related diagnoses. And like they have a whole autism-friendly business initiative. So if businesses want to become an autism-friendly workspace, you go through their local CARD, which there's 7 of these centers across the state at major universities. It's all free, and they help you set up some of these things. Like, so if you wanted to create some of those visual systems, you could collaborate with CARD and they would create them for you. If you said, hey, this is a checklist or this is a thing we want, I've never done one of these things before, I want to be you know, a neurodivergent, autism friendly business, you just connect with them and they help you with that. So I really wanted to focus on that because it's a Florida for everybody available resource. Yeah. And then these are 2 books. The last 2 resources and references are The Power of Potential, that Rising Tide car wash company, where they have lots of, I mean, excellent examples and visuals, etc. And then the last one is Workplace Neurodiversity Rising, which is written by a autistic neurodivergent person, Lyric Rivera, and has really great suggestions as well. Cool. And I will share this, Sean,
thank you,
so people can easily access the link.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate your time and all this, and I think this is going to be a great resource and something we can probably do again. You know, I think when we put it out there and I think people are like, oh, I can't believe I missed that one. Or I mean, I think, you know, for a lot of people they're busy, so I get that.
Totally.
But I think there's a lot of great material here and great information for people. So we really appreciate your time and effort and spending some time with us.
Thank you. As I say, this could be like an entire, you know, course, you know, like,
sure.
The extended conversations, many more discussions. But I think, you know, hopefully, even if there's one takeaway, you know, that makes it valuable, I think, just for people's time. So hopefully, but yeah, happy to talk about coming back to the conference at some point or something like that to continue these conversations if it's of interest. Yeah.
Yep, right, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Bren. Thanks for coming by.
Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting.
And yes, and then
nice
I'll have this up.
Thanks.
And then you said you're going to send me that deck.
Yeah, I will.
Allie?
Yeah, I'll send you a PDF.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hey,
All right. Well, I appreciate it. And then I hope you guys have a good weekend.
You too.
you
Take
too.
care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.